This is part 2 of the video on how to install a window in an existing wall without a window without removing the exterior stucco, drywall, or the interior drywall or lath and plaster. And remember, this is a suggested way to install something like this. It's actually something that might not be approved by an engineer or your local building authorities. Keep that in mind. With that out of the way, now the first thing you're going to need to know is to make sure that the window header is actually something that will fit in through the opening, and sometimes it's going to need to be a little bit shorter. And here's the reason why. As you can see, we're tied up against this stud here. If we were to cut it full length, if the distance in between the wall studs, let's just say, is 60 inches, and we cut our header 60 inches, it's fine if we can slide it into a square opening from a square opening, but it's not going to go into a square opening with at an angle as we're looking at here. Let's take a look over here. We have it's tight up against the wall stud. Go to the other side. It's not going to fit. So trust me, this is going to be difficult. Now you could always angle the header, but remember, if you do this, you're going to lose some of your support. So you could do it in a section like this. Let's say you had 3 inches and all you need is 1.5 inches for support. You could angle the header so that it would fit. Cut an angle, let's just say about a 20-degree angle, something like that. Maybe go from, if it was a 4x8 header, you could go from 0 to about an inch measurement here. Draw a line, cut that. I would imagine that would be sufficient. So keep in mind, they are not going to go too well, not going to fit too well. Now, if you try to force them in, if you move these studs, the wall studs that are attached to the drywall, the stucco, or the siding, you could actually damage the exterior or the interior. And the interior, where the drywall is, you could actually see it. It could become visible as you pop these nails loose. So it's not going to be a good thing. You do not want to move any of the studs or the studs that you cut to when you're installing the window, because like I said, any movement could create problems for the finish. Next thing to consider is that the header actually needs to be able to fit into the window opening that you have cut. And this, if it doesn't fit, or you're going to have to consider the size of the opening, you're not going to be able to go any bigger than this unless you want to damage the finish on the inside. And that's the whole reason for this particular video. Someone asked me how you could install a window in an opening like this without damaging the drywall. And this is where the finish comes in. A lot of times it's difficult for us, even myself, to match the finish on the texture, or, I mean, if it's a flat finish, that's not going to be difficult. But if it's a special type of texture, this might be the only way you could install a window in an opening like this, would be to cut it out and then trim it out and make sure that you don't damage the drywall. And part of that will be to, as I stated earlier, not to force the header in. You might be able to get it in at an angle. You might be able to have it a little bit longer and then get a section of it into the drywall at a little bit of an angle, and that might work. But anytime you start putting pressure on this stuff or trying to jam something in, you're going to end up creating a problem. So the window header size is going to be critical because it actually needs to fit in the opening. Here's another handy tip you can use building hardware. I believe Simpson has a product that's called an A34 that might work. And you can use this to connect the sills or any other part of the framing that you feel like you can actually get a screw or a nail into. And I don't recommend nailing. Don't hammer into the existing wall studs. Like I said earlier, any vibration could create problems for the finish. Use some type of screws for these holes, and you can always nail down. If it's something that's not going to move, like the bottom cripple, something like that, then feel free to use a nail. If not, use screws to attach the framing members. And you can always double them up if you're looking for a little extra support. Tie the windowsill to the king stud, let's say, and then tie the trimmer to the plate or the windowsill. And like I said, you can use these all over the place. You can use them up here, over here, around here, wherever you can get them. And again, you could always put them in here. It's just being able to reach them. You know, if you had some type of a long extension where you could screw these and attach them to something like this, then you could always attach them to the plate first. Like if you have a large area here, attach it to the plate because you're going to have a difficult time screwing down if you're too far in, and then slide the plate in and then attach it to the stud. So you try and plan this stuff out in advance. If you're looking for a little extra strength on the cripples up here, then put a angled bracket here, and that's going to give you a little bit of strength. But try to think ahead how you're going to assemble this stuff and make sure that you're actually going to be able to attach them. wouldn't be a good idea to put one here and then put the header in and then pull this trimmer over. This is buried now. It's not going to do you any good. So put a little bit of thought into something like this and save yourself some time and frustration. Trust me on that one. Yes, my friends, you will run into an electrical wire. And if you do, you can simply notch the stud around it. There's a nice notch. If it's in the center, you can notch it around like that, lower it in, or you can notch around it, depending on where the wire is. Sometimes the wires are going to be located off center. They're going to be a little bit to the right or a little bit off to the left. And if that's the case, you can always notch around it like this. Here's another way. You can simply rotate the wall stud and slide it behind the wire. And sometimes in cases like this, you can actually just use one wall stud. That'd be enough to support the sill and the trimmer. And I'm just suggesting that. This is if you're worried about that, then simply install another one. And if you have to, you can always notch around it. Now, keep in mind that you could always use a 2x4 and a 1x4. You know, you could rip a 2x4 down in half and put one side here and one side on the other side. And you don't need to use a full 3.5-inch 2x4 if you're looking to save a couple dollars. And don't force these in. You might have a wire that's a little bit off. You're going to have to notch it. You'll be able to slide the board, you'll put it more towards the center to where you can push the wire away. You're not just going to be able to shove something like this down into here because it's going to catch on the wire. Only way you can install something like this would be to move the stud with a notch in it over towards the center of the bay. Try to slide it in, and if you can't, you might need to rip this whole area down. You might need to notch it to where it can slide down around it. But every once in a while, you can move it to the middle of the bay, stud bay, in between studs, and then get the wire, because the wire will move a little bit, have a little bit of give in it, and then you can slip it past it. And then once it's slipped past the wire and the wire is in the notch, you can slide it in up against the stud, and you won't be crimping the wire or creating a problem for it. But the last thing you want to do is shove this board in here and end up pinching the wire somewhere. You do not want to do that. If that's the case, then just put one wall stud, one new framing stud in instead of two, or use a 1x4, something like that, or try another one of the methods. Here's another way you can frame the opening. You can have the header run past a little bit and then put two trimmers underneath it. Now, if you do something like this, you're not going to, the window header, it could actually move. You know, you could attach it to here, but this isn't something I'd really like to see you do. I mean, unless you can fill this area here, and you actually can. If you put the header in here and you have it, and the header actually fits, remember, We've got to be able to get the header in. If we can't, then we can't use this method. But what I'd like to see is this area filled somehow. And you can actually do that by installing the header and the cripples, put this trimmer in here, and then move this trimmer over. Move it over to here, and then fill this area in here with some wood. And you can always do that by taking a 2x4, sliding it over, and then sliding it up, and then screwing it into the stud, and then taking another 2x4, sticking it in there, screwing it in there until you've actually created an area where you filled this in, and we don't have to worry about the header going back and forth. Okay, this is the last tip I could think of, and that would be to use 2 boards. Instead of a 4x8, you would use 2 2x8s and then cut an angle at the end so that you could get the header into the opening. So sometimes you're going to have a difficult time getting a 4x8 into the opening that's only 3.5 inches, but you won't have a difficult time getting a 2x8, and then you would simply double the 2x8s up as something like this. And you can always put a piece of 3/8 plywood in between, or 1/2 inch, whatever would fit, to connect the headers. But remember, you're not going to be able to nail the headers together. This is just another method that you could use if you're having a difficult time getting a full header into the opening. And you can always use whatever you cut off here, the wedge shape. You could always have the trimmers moved over to here and then set the wedges in. You could actually put the wedges in and then put a trimmer underneath it to hold the wedges in. That'd give you a solid header in between the wall studs. Anyway, that is it for my tips. Don't forget to watch the first video if you haven't. And remember, I cannot stress this enough, this is just a suggested way of framing a window like this. However, it might not be approved in your local, with your local building authorities or engineers. Keep that in mind.